Well, let me wish you a very pleasant Sunday morning. Glad you could be with us. Looks like it could be a very nice day, as we're now firmly into May. Not that May comes with any kind of good weather guarantee. I don't know if you had a Law Day celebration at your house, but Friday, May 1st was Law Day. So this seems like a good time to talk about the law. How can it help us? Or what can we do if we find ourselves on the wrong side of a law? We have some good information that might save you some trouble in the future, and it's coming up right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, joining us this morning to talk about the law is attorney Carl Numanen from the Pence and Numanen firm in Marquette. Carl has had a successful practice here for over 20 years. According to his bio, he put himself through law school, working full-time during the day as an aide to Governor Jim Blanchard and going to classes at night. As a young attorney, he worked in two of the biggest law firms in Michigan. Carl was chosen for selection to the 2015 Michigan Super Lawyers List, an honor reserved for no more than 5% of the attorneys in the state of Michigan. Welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thanks, Don.
Before talking about the law, let's talk about you a little bit.
Okay.
You spent some time working for Governor Blanchard.
I did.
What was that about?
Well, I was a special assistant to Governor Blanchard during law school. I worked full-time for the governor, and I wrote his daily briefing memos on local government issues. So every day, as he traveled around the state of Michigan, the day before he got to a community, let's say he was coming up to Marquette, he would get a brief from me about Marquette politics, state government initiatives in Marquette, our successes, and talking points about what kinds of things that the governor has been involved in and his interest in the local area.
And I realized in brief conversation before our interview today that you were involved with Senator Regal's staff. You had some involvement in politics early on.
I did, right out of college. In fact, it was a strange transition. When I was in college, I was a bartender and I took a job as an usher at a movie theater. And I went from that to being an aide to a United States senator in a flip of a switch. And it was an incredible experience, and I was immersed in politics for a while. But then I decided, after Governor Blanchard lost the election, that my career was going to take a little bit of a different path, and I started practicing law.
What brought you to Marquette? How did you wind up here?
I'm from here as a kid.
Okay.
My dad was a professor at NMU when I was a little guy, and my little brother was born here. I lived on College Avenue back in the 60s.
Okay. Let's talk about Law Day. What's Law Day about? Why should we celebrate Law Day?
Well, Law Day is a day each year that's set aside to not only celebrate law, but maybe step back and reappreciate that the fact is our nation has been called a nation of laws. Think about some of the things that are happening right now this week that just took place. The Supreme Court argument on same-sex marriage, the issues happening around the country with violent eruptions that come out of some police and citizen encounters, and all of that touches on the laws that we have in this country. It's fascinating to watch.
I don't think people think about it all the time, but the law really affects all of us pretty much every day in our life.
Every day, all the time, in many ways that we don't even know or appreciate. And Law Day is designed to do a couple of things, I think. One is attorneys donate their time and services for free to help people on Law Day on what we would call pro bono services. But the other part of it is, another aspect, I think, is sometimes the general public can have a very negative perception of attorneys, partly brought on by the attorneys themselves, of course, like politicians. And I think it's important for attorneys to help to re-educate on exactly what our role is, what we do, and to help the general public appreciate that it's not always just what you see in the media, in the news, or in Hollywood portrayals of lawyers.
Let's talk about some very basic things when people may need some legal advice.
Sure.
What about wills? And we hear a lot about elder care today.
Absolutely.
What's important there, and who should consider getting some advice in that area?
Everybody should, for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes we think that the only time you need to have a will is if you have children and you need to worry about your beneficiaries in the event of your death. But the fact of the matter is, no matter what station in life you are, you should be thinking about succession planning and, if for no other reason, for tax advantages. Think about it right now. State of Michigan is involved in some discussion about what's been called the death tax, or it's an estate tax, and the law is in a continual state of change. It's always a good idea to get the advice of, especially people who specialize in estate planning, elder law, and wills and trusts, to get that kind of advice and do the right thing.
Is power of attorney part of that process, or is that something separate that people have to think about?
Well, power of attorney certainly can be, and there's two general types of power of attorney. One is just the standard limited power of attorney that I give to somebody just so they can sign a document. A lot of real estate closings happen with a power of attorney. I can't be at the closing, so I give a power of attorney in advance to my spouse or an attorney or the realtor sometimes, so that they can sign the closing documents for me. But I think what you're talking about is a durable power of attorney for health care. We never know when something might strike us, and we need to have somebody making decisions on our behalf when we can't make those decisions because we're incapacitated. That's what the durable power of attorney for health care does. And it certainly helps the physicians and the medical care providers take action on a person's behalf when they can't get the consultation and the permission from the patient himself.
I'm jumping real quickly from specialty to specialty, I guess.
Sure.
But what about small business? Should small businesses incorporate or form some sort of special limited liability arrangement?
No question about it. The two professionals at every small business must be consulting is their attorney and their accountant, and maybe not even in that order. But it's always a good idea, whether you're a sole practitioner or a small business with a number of different shareholders or partners and employees, to form a business entity that allows, that business entity then is a separate creation and under the eyes of the law is a person under the eyes of the law. And it does a couple of things. One, again, some tax advantages to forming the different types of business entities. But the other thing that a lot of people look at is primarily for liability protection. So if you're in a business, and it's not even necessarily a business that's in some kind of high-risk venture, but even if you, for example, you're a restaurant and you have vendors, you've purchased equipment and food and you know, linens and furniture, what happens in the event your business doesn't succeed? If you're personally liable for that, no matter what happens with the business, you're going to be paying those creditors. If you've created an entity that then is the contracting entity with the vendors, if the business doesn't succeed, you're not going to be personally on the hook for those unpaid creditors.
A lot of situations we've talked about: elder care, business, personal injury, divorce. How does someone go about finding the right attorney?
Well, that's critical. And it's just like if you were going to go to a doctor and you had some kind of gastrointestinal problem, you're not going to go to an ear, eyes, and nose doctor. You've got to find the right person who specializes in the area that you need. For example, I do primarily criminal defense, divorce, and personal injury. I never take on tax cases. I don't know the first thing about tax cases. I know some of the tax implications of divorce consequences, but I would never represent somebody in an IRS proceeding or in some kind of a tax litigation matter. I just don't know anything about it. So nowadays, with the advent of internet searches, you can really narrow down search and find exactly the right attorney in the right area, geographically, and who's got the experience that you need to do the kind of case that you've got.
Okay. I want to talk about criminal law, and we'll get back to that in just a couple of minutes. More with the Ryan Report after we take this break. And they can still see. Our guest this morning is attorney Carl Numminen. We're talking about the law. Let's talk about criminal law. This is one area that you mentioned that you specialize in. In fact, you were just elected vice president of a statewide organization?
Right. The Criminal Defense Attorneys of Michigan is the largest state association dedicated to the criminal defense lawyers who practice across the state. And the election results came out this week, and I was elected vice president.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it accurate to say that most attorneys probably don't want to do criminal law?
I think it takes a special type of attorney to not only want to do it, but succeed and be good at it. And part of the problem is that I get this question all the time: how can you represent somebody that's guilty? And my pat answer usually is, well, they're not guilty until a jury says they're guilty. Now, we still have this presumption of innocence that's guaranteed by the Constitution. So when a person comes to me and says they've been charged with or accused of some kind of a criminal matter, that person's innocent by definition at that point in time. So I'm not representing a guilty person. They're only guilty after the jury convicts them or they plead guilty.
You know, I was thinking about, as I was preparing for this interview in the old days, Perry Mason,
Sure.
criminal defense attorney, always won his cases and
Right.
always got innocent people off the hook.
Right.
You know, even in Anatomy of a Murder, the defense attorney was the person we kind of rooted for.
Oh, sure.
Jimmy
Yeah.
Stewart in this case, or,
Yeah, how
or
could you
John
not?
Volker, right? But it's not always that way in real life, is it?
It isn't, no. And what I found, it's discouraging sometimes. It's tough to be a criminal defense attorney because you're representing people who've been accused of sometimes of some very, very heinous things. And, I tell, the other colleagues that it's easy to represent somebody who has said that they've done whatever it is they've been accused of, because what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to get convicted. That's the right result, probably. It's very, very, very difficult, and it takes a very hard personal toll on an attorney to represent somebody you know in your heart and gut is innocent of the allegation. And you really I feel, every time I go into a trial of that kind, the whole world's on my shoulders.
Oh, certainly. But, going back to that other side of the coin, what is it like when you're representing, some clients who are obviously, they may not be guilty, but they're guilty.
Right,
and,
sure.
And perhaps they're dangerous people as well.
Well, and that happens obviously frequently. People, I don't think police and the prosecutors charge innocent people very often, although it does happen. So our approach, obviously, as a criminal defense attorney is there are two types of defenses in the world. There are factual defenses and there are legal defenses. Factual defenses would be true innocence. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Either the person you're accused of isn't me, or I didn't do what you're accusing me of doing, or what I did do isn't illegal. Then you've got a person who is, factually innocent. But there are also legal defenses. And this arises all the time in the context of criminal charges, where either the police or people acting on behalf of the police have done something illegal to get that criminal charges issued. And when that happens, let's say, for example, the police break down a door in somebody's home and search the house without a search warrant. Unless there's one of the very few limited exceptions to the Fourth Amendment requirement, that's an illegal search. The law says, and rightly so, that whatever is found as a consequence of an illegal search is not admissible as evidence and must be suppressed. If the police and the prosecutor don't have evidence of the crime because of the behavior of the police, the charges should be dismissed.
We also have situations, I'm sure, where people are guilty of a criminal activity, but there are some extenuating circumstances. And certainly I'm not talking about violent crimes here, but...
What can happen in violent crimes too? Think about it. Most self-defense cases, you stand-to-ground type cases. I handled a case a couple of years ago out of shooting that happened in Ishpeming. There was no question that my client shot and killed the person, that the deceased. No question about that. His defense was, though, he was in his own home. He was defending himself from an assault by that other person, and he shot and killed him. Well, the jury, we went through a whole trial, and in that case, the jury compromised. It said my client was not guilty of first-degree murder, but was guilty of manslaughter. In other words, he could have done something short of shooting and killing the man.
What do you feel is the key to being a successful criminal trial lawyer?
I think you have to have passion. If you don't have passion, if you don't have a true interest in what it is you're doing, you should just do something different. Switch over to do transactional law, do real estate, do tax law. In order to be a successful criminal lawyer and a criminal defense attorney, you have to appeal and persuade the jury. And the only way you're going to do that is with passion.
Is that jury summation a big part of this process, or is that overplayed in the movies?
It's overplayed in the movies because that's the time where the lawyers do the drama. I think more importantly, for my own personal opinion, is a lot of juries make their decision on the case during opening statement, before any witness has even testified. The prosecutor tells the jury what he thinks or she thinks the testimony is going to show and the evidence. The defense attorney responds with what he or she thinks the evidence is going to show. Oftentimes jurors make up their minds then, and they sit through the trial and they listen, and they only hear that evidence then that supports the conclusion they've already come to. So the opening statement, in my opinion, is more important than the closing. The closing arguments, that's what gets shown on TV.
Right. Just quickly, is jury selection a big part of this process?
Absolutely critical. And it's disturbing to me as a practicing attorney that more and more judges are taking away our right to be involved in the jury selection. In a lot of federal courts, the federal judge will do the questioning of the jurors without allowing the lawyers to ask any questions during jury selection.
Okay. Got some more questions. We'll get back with more questions for Attorney Carl Numminen after we take this break. We're talking this morning with Attorney Carl Numminen, talking about the law and observance of Law Day, which was a couple of days ago. Do you practice in federal court?
I do, regularly.
Regularly. I heard an interesting discussion actually on the way to work today.
Okay.
And it had to do with some high-profile white-collar criminals or people who wound up in prison. But they were really coming down pretty hard on the prison system. And the fact that it really, for nonviolent criminals, the way they characterized it, it's revenge. It's not rehabilitation. Any thoughts on that?
Well, you think about it. The most famous white-collar criminal that we've had in the recent years is Martha Stewart. And Martha Stewart was charged with a crime about insider trading. She actually was convicted of lying to the federal investigators and served some short amount of time in a federal penitentiary. That penitentiary was more like a college dormitory than it was anything that you see on TV, you know, that the Women in Orange, or Orange is the New Black program. For people that are convicted of white-collar offenses with no prior record and don't pose a violent threat, they're not going to be in maximum security facilities. It just doesn't happen. They're going to be in places like where Martha Stewart was.
Is that the best punishment for people who commit those kind of crimes?
Well, there's got to be some kind of a punishment, and you know, it seems to me we're punished. The punishment that affects us the most is what is most dear to us. What's most dear to us? Our liberty, clearly. For some people, what's most dear to them is their money. Maybe a person who's committed, and I'm not talking about Martha Stewart now, but Ivan Boesky, for example, and some of the people that are infamous white-collar criminal defendants who were convicted. Maybe the most serious punishment that could be imposed on them is financial. Do we need to take Michael Milken, for example, the junk bond king who got convicted of a crime? Do we need to put him in prison to protect us? No, certainly not. What's the most important punishment for him? Money. So some kind of significant financial penalty to a person like that, it seems to me, would be the most appropriate kind of punishment.
We only have 30 seconds, but this obstruction of justice can be a serious crime too, can't it? And
no question.
You can't lie.
Absolutely not.
And that's not just perjury in court, even in other stages of the investigation is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, my own little aside here, it's interesting. The police and investigators can lie to you in the context of an interview, no problem. You lie to them, that's a criminal offense.
So I guess the key thing is, if you think you're in trouble, get an attorney.
Right away, don't wait.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in. I could talk to you for another half hour, I'm sure, but maybe we can do it again in the future sometime.
I would love to. Thanks,
okay.
Don.
Our guest this morning is Carl Numminen. I'll be back with some thoughts for you after we take this break. It's spring, at least according to the calendar, and this is traditionally a time to clean up around the house. Spring cleaning time also means yard sales, garage sales, or whatever you might call them. Yes, it's time to look through your houses and try to get rid of things we don't want or need anymore. But for some of us, that's not as easy as it sounds, especially if we're talking about throwing things away. Now, I'm not a hoarder, not even close, but I do have a problem tossing things out. I'm not sure what the reason is. Sometimes it's a sentimental attachment, not wanting to throw away something that was a gift from someone special, even though I never have used it. More often, though, I think it's just that I'm cheap. I remember that at some point in time I paid good money, sometimes a fairly large amount of money, to buy something. The fact that I no longer use it doesn't seem to matter. It just doesn't seem like I've gotten full value for it, so I just can't get myself to throw it away. In case you think I'm exaggerating, I can tell you that right now I have, and this is just a partial list, a couple of VCRs I never use anymore, a laptop that hasn't worked for years, a computer printer that was replaced by a new one a year ago, and a full-size professional audio deck that I picked up when a place where I was working got rid of it. It's not just electronics. I have clothes I haven't worn in years, a chair gathering dust, and a whole lot more. One thing I came across the other day is a digital TV tuner converter box. Remember those? Back in, I think it was 2009, we were all urged to get one of these when television, at the direction of the government, made the conversion from analog to digital. I got mine, and it's still in the unopened box with a Radio Shack sticker showing a price of $59.95. Now, you just can't throw away something when you paid $59.95 for it and still haven't taken it out of the box. The problem is, since we always keep buying more stuff, eventually we have to get rid of some of the old stuff, or else get one of those storage units that are available to rent. I draw the line there. Renting a place to store stuff I don't really want or need isn't something I'm about to do. I know this is starting to sound like an old George Carlin routine, but I'm serious. So what's the answer? Here's a system I use, and you can feel free to use it yourself. I look through my stuff and decide what are the things I should really throw away. Then I put them back on the shelf. Next year, I'll go through that process again, and at that point, throw away at least some of the things I should have thrown away last year. It gives you a year to get used to the idea of parting company with some things you don't need, but really can't seem to part with. It doesn't make sense, but it seems to work for me. If you have a similar problem, maybe it will work for you. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. A couple of reminders before we go. If you missed the show, want to watch it again, or recommend it to someone else, it will be available on the internet. Just go to uppermichigansource.com. The latest version is usually available starting at about noon tomorrow. And if you have some thoughts you want to share with us, our email address is theryanreport@chesstv.com. I'd like to hear from you. Thanks to Carl Numanen for joining us today. I hope the information he provided was helpful to you. And I also hope you won't be needing an attorney for any serious charges in the future. The folks at the Today Show are ready to roll, so enjoy the rest of your day, and please join us next Sunday morning. And once again.